Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the July 20th Special Committee of the Whole meeting. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. Up front, we have one report on the agenda along with a presentation from consultants KWL for the Manager of Utilities, an update on the Water Use Planning and Management Study Phase 1. Do we have that delegation right now? Before we move forward. I see them here, so because we're looking for approval to go to the next one, so it's the only thing next on the agenda. So are you gentlemen appearing at the podium here? Welcome. Come on down, sir. Yeah, nice to see you again.
Green.
You are now. If you could introduce yourself, gentlemen, and we'll get ready. Looking forward to your presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Steve Bridger with Kerwood Lydell Consulting, and I am the project manager for the Water Use Planning and Management Study.
And I'm Craig Sutherland with Kerwood Lydell Associates, and I'm senior hydrologist and technical engineer on the supply side for the study.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a brief presentation to start, and then understand that there's a number of questions to go through for the remainder of the meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
If we could hold our questions until after the presentation, Council, and then we'll get into it in a little more detail then. Thank you.
Sounds great. Okay, so here's the cover slide for the study, and maybe we can jump to slide number 1, please. So just to do an overview of the goals of the project as per the request for proposal, as it was stated initially, was to review and complete a comprehensive assessment of the city and the Englishman River water supply source, potable water sources, as well as the demand and future demand for the city, along with the Nanoose area, which the system all feeds. So essentially, there was a capacity analysis to determine how we can meet the future demands, and a review of this existing storage, including surface water sources and groundwater sources, to see what is needed to service the system over a 50-year timeframe, including obviously the current conditions. Additionally, the report was to focus on existing water conservation measures and what measures can be further implemented to assist with reducing water demand in the future, as well as take a brief look at the hydropower generation options if there was to be a new surface water source implemented. So that's summarized in our report, which I believe was circulated about a month ago. And just to touch on the key water supply reliability focus for the system, everything was studied under the need to meet sort of, I guess, best practices for water supply reliability, and taking a detailed look at what the current system water reliability is. And the system effectively, or today, the Arrowsmith Reservoir is the primary source with an effective volume of 9 million cubic meters and approximately 2 million cubic meters in sort of emergency storage. There's also further sort of restraint on the system in needing to provide up to approximately 1 cubic meters a second as an environmental flow in the Englishman River, which has been in place for a while. I think it's closer to 1.6 typically, but And that does vary depending on the sort of absolute minimum that can be provided. And the study was done primarily looking at not enacting water level 4 water conservation measures, because we want to look at more typical water supply system where you don't want to be having to implement water restrictions to that level on a regular basis, which obviously is a significant goal. So from there, I may hand it over to Craig, who's going to go through some more detail on the immediate analysis within the study.
Thanks. Thanks. Thank you, Steve. And yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us. So I know there were some questions about the storage evaluation, and we just wanted to go through both how were the new sources screened, what did we sort of use as the original sort of screening criteria, and then how were they evaluated. So in terms of screening, we focused on storage opportunities within the Englishman River watershed and the local aquifers. So we weren't sort of looking out beyond in terms of like looking at it sort of regionally. It was really focused on what's available for the city and for Nanoose, and with a focus on the Englishman River watershed. We had, and that was sort of through conversations with staff. The reliability target was established at 29 out of 30 years or 90% reliable. And that was based on a review of some of the guidelines that are available and what other communities are doing around the region. And again, that was based on some discussions that we had at workshops with staff. And then finally, was it technically feasible? Looking at topography, like gravity versus pumping storage, and just sort of other technical criteria. So that was sort of the initial screening evaluation. And then we did a preliminary multiple accounts evaluation looking at for the storage options that were selected, looking at capital costs, the construction feasibility, technical feasibility, regulatory risks, environmental benefits, costs, but at a sort of semi-quantitative level. So sort of assigning like, okay, high to low. It wasn't a sort of a detailed evaluation, but it was to be able to provide a way of being able to rank the different options. And we, so I think maybe Steve, you can slide over to the next slide there. Yep. Yeah, so based on that, we identified four watersheds within the or sub-watersheds within the Englishman River watershed, and 5 potential storage locations that are all sort of headwater storage, similar to the way that Arrowsmith works. And most of these had been identified previously in previous studies in terms of from the past regional studies. And the main reason for that is they're the kind of locations where there's either an existing lake or there's an area where the topography works that for every incremental height of a dam that you need to construct, you get quite a bit of storage. So that was sort of the main focus, is to try and find those locations to come up with sort of the best unit cost per cubic meter of storage. And those, similar to the past studies, kind of came up with the same locations. And so those were sort of the main primary ones. In addition, we did look at the option to raise Arrowsmith, and we did look at side storage, off-channel riverside storage options, and I'll go through that in a minute or two here. But essentially these 5 options, 4 of them, the costs are all of like, they're in the same ballpark, especially given the way that these cost estimates were developed. They're preliminary at this point, and it's really order of magnitude, just to give us this sort of an order of magnitude sense. And so we've, except for Moriarty Creek, which is significantly more. And so the outcome of that was to focus on those 4 options as part of future evaluation. One thing to keep in mind is when we were doing the evaluation, we looked at each storage site individually. We said, can this site alone provide and meet the reliability target? We didn't get into the looking at, can we combine them? Can we phase it? We didn't get into that level of detail and in phase 1. So there may be some opportunities for that moving forward. So yeah, the next slide. So the other source of supply for Parksville is groundwater in Aquifer 216. And there's our groundwater hydrologist. I'm a surface water hydrologist, so I can speak at a high level around some of this, but our groundwater hydrologist identified that there is maybe some potential for additional withdrawal from the aquifer. The aquifer appears right now to be able to recover based on its current withdrawal rates. And so there might be some potential there to provide some additional flow from the aquifer to help support the demand in the community, to help reduce the demand on the river. There were also 2 other aquifers that are located about 8 to 10 kilometers south of the city that could also potentially be a new source of groundwater, but there isn't a lot of information on those, and so there would need to be further study done to confirm that. So in terms of the off-channel storage, so we looked at 2. So the first that we looked at was an apples to apples comparison with the other storage sites. So the other storage locations, there was storage required both for the community withdrawal as well as meeting the environmental flow need, and bringing those both up to the 97%. And so just to look at it sort of in terms of the equal costs, it requires a reservoir between 100 or 80 to 160 hectares, depending on the geometry of the pond. So essentially how deep can it physically be? And the intent would be to either divert water into it or pump water into it through the winter and then use that water in the summer. And the rate that I would need to be to fill that is about 22 million liters per day. And for comparison, the current pump station is 16. Yeah, 16 or 19. Like the pump station's 19. So just in terms of a comparison, and so that would be running at that rate for 6 months to fill it. And the construction estimate was about 72 million. So it's about $15 per cubic meter. And whereas the other surface water storages were sort of between like $1.70 to $5 a cubic meter, depending on the site. So just in terms of a comparison. Just to give you sort of a sense, let me just double check. I've got the sizes here. So the 4.8 million cubic meters, if you think about the size of Raft River Park, the whole park, it's about 4 meters of water over that area, just to kind of give you a sense of scale. And so it's a big area. And so that's one of the reasons. So if we go to the next slide. So another option would be, so what is the demand that the communities will need through the summer by the 2080s? And this was assuming the current withdrawal rates from the groundwater. And it's about 2.9 million cubic meters and that's from June to October, which is sort of typically the operating period for the dam. And so that would essentially mean not withdrawing any water from the river over that period. And for that case, again, it's about 50 hectares to 100 hectares, again, depending on the depth that you can get to. And it's closer to it's just a little bit less than the current in terms of pumping rate. It's a little bit less than the current pump station for 6 months. The estimate, again, high level estimate is about 44 million approximately. And then comparison to the other one. So based on that we sort of concluded that just for cost reasons, as well as for land reasons, in terms of both the cost of land, the value of land, as well as land use considerations, that it wasn't economically feasible to sort of pursue those options. So that was the reason. Kind of in going through the report, we could have expanded on that a little bit more in the report. So apologies for that. But this provides a bit of background on the reasoning for it. So kind of continuing on, we also, in terms of increasing storage at Arrowsmith, it would be, so there's two parts of this. One is in the long term, relying solely on Arrowsmith because of the limited watershed area, isn't going to be able to meet that reliability target just because of the limited inflow to the reservoir even through the winter. It is small. It's like 1.5% of the whole watershed area. And so, however, there could be an opportunity in terms of phasing to raise the dam as a first step, and then that would help sort of provide some improvement in the reliability, and then move on to a larger raising, a larger increase in the storage based on a more detailed evaluation of a sort of a phasing option. What this would mean is be raising the dam by about 3 meters. And again, it wasn't considered more in phase 1 on its own because it just wouldn't meet the reliability target in the future. But as I say in the slide, it could be considered as part of a phasing in the future, potentially. And the cost for this is sort of in probably the 5 to 10 million kind of range, for just without sort of, because there would likely need to be sort of some additional upgrades to the dam besides just raising the crest of it, from a stability standpoint and seismic standpoint. So that was, so on the next slide, please. And so this is just some other background information for this study, and we can refer to these through the rest of the meeting if we need to. There's some extra slides here just that we can go to if we need to refer to anything. Classic again, the gray doesn't show up. So this is, so on the side it doesn't show up on the front. So this is a similar slide. This is the same slide that we showed previously, and it essentially shows like the contributions of the different components in the of flow in the Englishman River. The gray is the natural base flow, so that's just how much is naturally coming off the watershed. The blue is what the withdrawal is at the plant. The green is how much the dam is releasing to support the environmental flow needs, and the orange, which is tiny little sliver, are the other licenses. And so this is kind of gives you a sense of the range of of flows that are in the river, and really to show like there are opportunities for being able to like there's a lot of water in the winter further down in the watershed. But it's the challenge is trying to capture that water further up in the watershed where there are the opportunities to provide the storage. So, and this slide is showing just a little bit more of a detail through the summer operating period, breaking down. It's essentially taking those 4 months through the summer and just providing a little bit more detail. So you can really see that the green part of the pie is the environmental flow need, and that's how much the dam releases from the dam are supporting the environmental flow need in the river. So a large part of the water in the dam is supporting the environmental flow need, with the blue part of the pie being how much is being withdrawn by the community during the operating season. Yeah, and then this final slide is showing the reliability amounts for the current system and sort of moving out into the future, with the reliability sort of decreasing over time with climate change and with increasing demand in the community. From sort of it's essentially about half in terms of the reliability number by the time you reach the 2080s. And yeah, and that's.
You good?
And
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, gentlemen, for your presentation. And I understand that. I want to qualify that the last 3 years has been an incredible learning curve for all of us here at the table, recognizing from our participation in the RWS boards as well as the AWS boards, understanding what our water, where it comes from and where it goes to, and what the province is telling us what we must provide for habitat and so forth. Under these learnings that we have, we recognize that Arrowsmith Dam is pretty well reserved, so we can maintain the flow rate, is actually reserved for habitat, and which is great from an environmental point of view. But for a point of view from who paid for that dam and so forth, is not so great, because it was the water users in the system, including Parksville and Danus, with our participating collaboration with them. So that was one big learning curve, that kind of what's with all that water in there? Why don't we just release that? Why are we going into water conservation extreme stage 4 now? And it's been a hard message for the public to understand. It's a hard message for me to understand, quite honestly. So we are considering constantly looking at maybe there's a more equitable way of who's paying for the operation and upgrades to the dam, which is needed, including seismic and everything else. So we check on a regular basis, and maybe we have some participation from other players, such as the province. We will look at. But recognizing that any of your suggestions for storage that says Arrowsmith Dam, I say no, because whatever we put into it, type of thing, we're not going to get out of it. But you know, the habitat is going to be very well maintained, which is great. But at the same time, I think that that's for others to do. Our end goal, as you mentioned, anyways, from the very, I think Steve mentioned it, that conservation is not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get away from conservation by creating satisfactory storage water that's going to meet our needs for today's growth as well as future growth. And that is the end goal. And so we're looking forward to moving forward on with phase 2. And that's what we're here for today, to kind of decide where we're going to go from here on in. And my understanding is very clear now as to what's that storage is. And as far as the other lakes go, the other lakes if we were to go for the Highland Lakes, the Moriarty and all the rest of it, if we were to go to them, they're still using the Englishman River as a transportation main, as the delivery system. And once again, I feel that anything that comes out of those, once again, the province is going to say, well, we want even more of that. And I'm afraid that getting a water license to get out of those other lakes is going to be the same situation we ran into Aerosmith. So I'm reluctant to go that. Gentlemen, I'm still at the point in my mind, after everything I've heard, that the best thing that we can do is capture that winter's excess water that falls with rain and precipitation in the winter, and capture that and store it somehow. You've mentioned some really good ideas. Give us an idea what kind of looks like, other than expropriating Rath Trevor Park and putting the reservoir there, because there we go. We know that size works. Turning it into an aqua park instead of a camping park, maybe. But it gives me the idea of the size. My question would be, after having talks with Mosaic and so forth, Mosaic Lands would be more satisfactory to use as side storage, Mosaic Lands adjacent to the Englishman River, which is going to provide the side stream storage flow if possible. The Mosaic Lands being relatively close to us, like as close to us as possible would be the plan, because it's all about cost. But they have a lot of land, like, as you say, the size of Rath Trevor. Recently, the RDM just purchased Hamilton Marsh. How many hectares was that, Councillor? Do you remember? It was a lot, yeah, for about $30 million. They purchased it, but part of the reason for that cost was because it's the land, the logging value of it, the tree value. And so, but there's a lot of areas that Mosaic have already logged way closer to us, to our city limits, and, actually right where their offices are and so forth, that may be more palatable to putting in storage reservoirs where they could take advantage of the side stream storage. So what I would like, my preference at this point, is to evaluate still a side stream storage options, and maybe not in just one reservoir, but using it would have to be Mosaic Lands as the first suggestion, adjacent to us, and is one reservoir or do we use multiples? Do we use 1, 2, 3, 4? With the overflow going to each of it. It gets the cost down apparently by, instead of making one huge one the size of Rath Trevor Park, but at the same time it gives better failure against preventing failure of one of the reservoirs type of thing. You have the backups as well. I would like that to be explored anyway. So what that would look like, and how adjacent to it. And once again, that, as well as the other option of what would it take to purchase land within the industrial park that we already looked at. So we already own some land in there. There's other pieces of land that are up for sale type of thing. Is there an advantage to that? And what is, if we actually deepen the excavation in that area type of thing? If we have to buy a few bundles of property, $5 and $10 million each, that's a lot better than getting it from the Highlands up on top. That is my hope that we could have in this next phase, is considering those two, as well as checking out the possibilities of subsurface wells, so forth. I know, Craig, you mentioned anyways that you're a surface water hydrologist, and I appreciate that. But just to consider those other aquifers that they may provide some additional flow at the same time, which could either be put piped in, to the ARWS, or into a storage system as well. So that is my two thoughts that I hope that you could do. And I understand everything that you've done in the first phase was all about the data. You've done an amazing job on that. You've given all the data, what we have, where it comes from, and actually express that very well. But we also know that we will need more storage water. And the reason I keep on saying I want storage water from the side stream storage is because, unlike the wells, this doesn't affect other areas around us, their aquifer. If we're just taking the winter rains and so forth, we're not affecting the aquifers. If we overuse or drill more wells type of thing, our drilling of those wells could actually impact our neighbors, and that is not a good neighbor policy in my mind. And so I think that the side stream has all the benefits. The water's there. We just have to learn how to capture. So I also subscribe to Water Canada, the magazine, because I'm kind of
Mm.
a water a nerd. And so with that in mind, I know that there's very options across Canada and so forth that have been implemented. Other ways of capturing water or stored or reservoir water. If those other options, maybe borrow some ideas from everyone else, that would be good if we could look at that at the same time.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's just my comments. I'm going to let open the floor. That's so that kind of sums up where I would hope phase 2 goes. Everything else that you're suggesting, I say just stop until we get that done first. And no pressure here, guys, but we don't have a lot of time left in our term. No pressure. But at the same time, I'm just your comments on that. Is that something that is doable, or is there any more clarification you need? What I was hoping to get. Or?
No, I think that it's clear. I think, yeah, so it definitely in terms of looking at it and as a phased approach or options is something to look into.
And that's exactly, you came up with the term I was looking for, as a phased approach. First phase is create this one, and the second phase will create the next one, which will give us that sufficient storage. But it's going to be done over phase periods type of thing, because that's the best way to do it anyways, is that with any major project like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate that that intent. Yeah, thank you. Council. First up, Councilor Grens, you reaching for your mic? You want to go? I don't know. I'm just guessing. Unless you want to call a coffee break.
Yeah, I think I've had too much coffee.
Had enough.
Sure, I'll go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to our delegation. Thank you very much for all the work, and thanks for coming back today for this committee of the whole. I hope that there's an opportunity for a bit more of a kind of free conversation in this format. So feel free to treat it that way. I think if you have anything you want to jump in on or add to the conversation. So yeah, thank you. Very comprehensive report, and I appreciate the update on this. In terms of, I guess, maybe I have a lot of questions around everything, but maybe I'll just start with kind of the overarching question, which is kind of the goal of this meeting is, what would you see as being the best way to structure a second phase of this process to get the best value out of that process? The first phase seems to me to, and I think this is what you're speaking about, look at what's a single source that we can use to make up for the demand and the reliability that we're targeting. But there's also conversation about maybe multiple approaches to hit that reliability instead of a single. So with that context, what would you say would recommend, having now done the first phase, for us to get the best value of the second phase?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Grens. It's good to be here. So there's two parts of that that sort of in sort of conversations internally and conversations with staff. The first is the technical side. So the first is looking at, okay, what are kind of come up with, sort of do the assessment again in terms of come up with a long list of potential combinations of those options and potentially some others, and look at what are some options to move forward on a phased approach. So that's part of it. And then the other part is to start an engagement process with other interested parties around the discussion around, okay, there is the cost, but there are other values to be measured or to understand in terms of the location. What are some potentially environmental impacts? Just to be able to work collaboratively in coming up with that selection. Yes, there's the technical side. There's sort of in terms of technical feasibility, but there are the other components that would also need to be considered as part of that process, and having the other interested parties involved in those conversations would be important at this stage, because there may be some that are just, they may be a technical solution, but maybe there's a non-starter because of other situations. So that could just drop off the table right away.
maybe teasing into the values question there is one of the maybe one of the overarching values is to what extent do we need to provide water for outdoor use? And at what point in the decades moving forward do we hit a point where the indoor use is actually now kind of at risk? My understanding from the report is that there's no current concern around indoor and firefighting and sort of those normal uses. It's just in the peak times when you have 72% of the water being used for outdoor, that's where we run into the issue. But there is a value about, and this is, I think, shifting culturally as well, is, do we water our lawns? Obviously, we still want to water, gardens and all that sort of thing, but the lawns themselves is something that I think culturally is changing, that people aren't having the same expectations around having like a golf course style lawn in front of your house. So maybe there's a question in there, which is, at what point do we kind of hit a point where we're now risking not having enough indoor use water? And then I know you can't probably answer the value question about how much we should be putting towards lawns, but yeah.
Yeah, so on the first part of the question, in terms of when, that's not something kind of specifically that looked at, but generally and now this is the total demand. So generally about 2/3 of the total annual demand is used through the summertime. And so if you can kind of reduce that down, that is fairly significant component of the water, that total volume. And that was discussed and addressed to some extent in the report with regards to conservation measures, and providing some recommendations on different programs and potential projects to look at water conservation. And that does make a difference. There are a couple of graphs in the report that show sort of a reduction in the demand and then a slow increase as with growth. So there wasn't sort of a specific in terms of that background, what the future is, but it was beyond what the planning horizon was for the study, which was the 50-year period. Yeah.
Are you good? Yeah, okay, Councillor Gore, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and a very detailed report. Good to have those options, I think, explicitly expressed now in this meeting. My question is about the methodology. When you gave us all those different options about potential sources, what sort of methodology was used to come up with those costs and the feasibility of those sources? Was it just a review of the previous studies or any satellite imagery? Like, I just want to make sure we are making the most informed decision when we choose one of those sources. So if you can speak to the methodology, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. So it was a combination. We reviewed the previous studies, and those identified those areas. We also looked at the topography with regards to where in the watershed are there locations where, for that sort of that incremental height of a dam, how much storage can you get? And that assessment came out to kind of the same locations as previously. There are so many sites within the area that within the watershed that have that combination of the right topography. And normally it's a lake. So if you think about sort of it's sort of the difference between storing volume in a triangle versus storing volume in a square, right? So for the same amount of
So just to clarify, did that include like field trips? You went there actually to?
No.
Okay.
There was no field investigation as part of this study. The field trip that we did do was up to the existing dam.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question. Thank you. You spoke about the Arrowsmith Dam and the possibility of raising it. Our current deficit is 2.2 million cubic. It will give us about 2, better than nothing. And I think in the staff report, it mentions that staff recommends looking at this as an option. I personally do like it as a phased approach. Strategy is already there for us to explore this as an option. Can you speak to a little bit on the timeline? If we were to start working on raising the dam, what sort of timeline are we looking at in getting those additional 2 million cubic meters of water? Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a couple of components to the timeline. One is the design side, and then the second is the regulatory permitting, because it would require a change to the water license. And so in terms of timing, it wouldn't be, so a new source is probably in the 10-year kind of range to get a new source online. I would say an upgrade would be probably half of that. So yeah, in that sort of range.
Thanks. And since we're in committee of the whole,
Yeah, that's sort of after the decision's been made to move forward with that option would be sort of in that kind of timeline. Yeah.
Right. And Councillor Gorvin, as Craig had mentioned, anyways, the raising of the Arrowsmith Dam would have limited value in my mind, in my opinion, because of what Craig said about it's such a small amount of catchment in it. Because the watershed that would supply that, in fact, our existing dam that we have now does not always fill right now during the winter months. We've had times when it's not been that spillover. Climate change is changing a lot of things, and that is included. So even if we add, build up the walls another 30 feet, there's no guarantee that nature is going to actually fill that during the winter. So if you can't capture it as it's such a small area, if you have some rainfall spread over the whole watershed, obviously that's what the Englishton River does and collects all that. But at the same time, that it's you've been up the dam, I think, haven't you? You see it's such a tiny little cone, so there's no guarantee about that. That's just my comments on that. That's why I'm a little reluctant on that. Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I thank you for the reports. They're, I was hoping I would have more decisions to be able to make, too many options here. And the phased approach would probably be the most practical. But what about one of the lakes going into the dam? Like using one of the lakes, it's part of what your study has been. So the cost of that, raising the dam, is that a 5-year, would be 10 years too, like you just mentioned? Would that work? I mean, what I find really hard is I was in Victoria when we had a water problem. I don't know if it mentioned, and they raised their dam and they have more water than they'll ever need now. And so I find this seems to be such a simple thing, but it's not. So is it quite different than what happened in Victoria with their dam?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Martin. Yeah, the main driver is there are two pieces when you're looking at surface water supply that you need to consider. One is how much water on an annual basis is there that's coming off, and that's to be able to provide flow throughout the year, both for the community and for environmental flow needs, as well as be able to refill the storage that you've depleted the year before. For the CRD system down in Victoria, the Greater Victoria Water Supply System, their watershed in terms of a ratio is significantly bigger with the ratio of the amount of water that's available in the watershed to this amount of storage, because the watershed is quite a bit bigger. The other piece with the Victoria system is they do have that, it's not been implemented yet, but there is the future potential implementation of the Leech River system to be able to bring additional water in. Going back to the first part of your question around the other lakes upstream of Arrowsmith, it's because it's all coming from the same watershed. You need to, whether that storage is being filled at the downstream end where the dam is or further upstream, it's all coming from the same location. So even though you could split that storage up over a couple of different locations, because the overall watershed isn't supplying sufficient water to refill the storage currently, it wouldn't provide enough to fill up 2 storages in the same watershed. You could look at it at a separate watershed, like the Fishtail as an example. But because it's all coming from the same watershed, it wouldn't be able to fill up both of the storages. Yeah.
Good. Councillor Fries, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, through the mayor to our delegation. In your presentation here, you had mentioned Aquifer 216, but in your report, it was Aquifer 221 that you guys were speaking about as the potential to there. So I guess why the shift from like why the focus on 216 here and not mentioning 221?
Yeah.
And also, isn't 221 known vulnerable aquifer as it is now? You talk about groundwater like being only a potential supplement there too, but yeah. Anyways, why? How come 221 is not mentioned here, but it was one of the key findings in your report?
Yeah. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we did look at both aquifers, Aquifer 221. If we could, do you mind pulling up that slide with the Aquifer 221 there is a system, San Periel, I think, that draws from that aquifer. And it is closer to the ocean. So further study would be needed to figure out what further water could be drawn from there. I think here the reference to Aquifer 216 is your current aquifer where again there's potential for a small amount to be drawn from that as well. Just further study is needed in terms of a groundwater numerical model, which the regional district in Nanaimo has done some of that work in the past, but it hasn't been done in the context of the city's supply and withdrawal specifically.
Okay.
Okay. And then also, it seemed like Shelton and Healy Lake were some primary sources that have been identified in the past too. What's your guys' opinion then on the potential out of there? And I guess like why haven't they been highlighted as more as like we're looking for some kind of clear direction and saying like this is your best option for not just the value, but for if you look at a lifetime, as Councillor Grenz mentioned, like looking forward ahead in generations here, would this not be the one to benefit us long term? I don't want to see us take a position of going, oh, let's do something that's of good value, meaning just cheap for us now, but then in 20 years we go, oh, like we should have gone with the more robust system because now we just made it harder for ourselves later on. We already spent a whole whack of money and now it's more expensive to do what we should have done in the first place. So, when I think about value, it's the long term, not just what this council or the next council will be having to face for the taxpayers, but the residents in 20 years, what's the value over a lifetime?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Fries. So there's for Shelton and Healy, they have been identified previously as potential options, as you mentioned. So there were, in addition to the cost, there were some other considerations for that may kind of at the level of the analysis that was done to sort of provide clear direction. There was, so for Shelton, it's similar to Arrowsmith in that the watershed area is relatively small. And so the ability to refill storage in that location is limited. The Healy is downstream. It has quite a larger watershed area, which is helpful in terms of refilling. But there could potentially be some environmental considerations. It's more of a wetland than a lake. And so there could potentially be species at risk or other considerations that would need to be considered as part of permitting. So there's a bit more of a permitting risk and environmental risk on that one. And then the other piece for both is the amount of storage that's required it would be more because there would be a requirement to release, because the water is coming from the South Englishman River watershed, there would be an additional requirement to supply environmental flow needs for the South Englishman. So the amount of storage, that's why the storage numbers for those are higher than fishtail, is because there would be a supplemental need to supply additional flow along the South Englishman. So even though they're from a technical perspective and a cost perspective, they seem to be high on the list because of those other considerations. They kind of balanced off with the other options like fishtail or the South Englishman tributary. The fishtail has a smaller volume requirement because it's feeding directly into the Englishman, so it would essentially supplement the existing environmental flow need requirements for the Englishman River, the main stem of the Englishman River. But one of the challenges with fishtail was more on the technical side is access. It would be a difficult site to get to. So it's sort of those trade-offs, and that's why we went through that process. And in the end, there were several that kind of came out close. And so there'd need to be kind of more evaluation. There wasn't sort of a clear front runner after doing that analysis. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. So speaking of the Fishtail area as well, there is that small lake between Arrowsmith Dam and Fishtail, I think Hidden Lake, I believe it's called. Why no mention about, draining that one into the Arrowsmith Dam, seeing that it seems like the access it's on the same side of the ridge. There's already a road that's going right up to it. It's right above Arrowsmith, and it seems like you could just put a line and a tap, and then, I know it's not a lot of volume, but when you talk about if the dam's not spilling over, if you're supplementing even 20% out of it, that's quite a bit more water that's not being utilized right now. Is that an option, or why has that not been discussed as like, here's a little bit more low hanging fruit to get more water to the Arrowsmith Dam?
Yeah. So sort of similar. So Hidden Lake flows into Arrowsmith, as you indicated, and because it's within the same watershed, whether that's stored at the existing location or at Hidden Lake, it's all coming from the same volume of water. And so essentially the volume that you would require to fill up Hidden Lake is now not going to the Arrowsmith water.
So it's already draining into the dam.
It's already
and
draining
supplying
into
water
the
there?
dam already. So capturing it further upstream,
It's not.
it's not providing an added
If it's
benefit.
already draining into it, then yeah, it's a moot point at that point. To me, it seemed like it sits there and just evaporates and doesn't do anything. So, because you have water up there in August as well as sitting up there, and our dam's going low and there's still water in Hidden Lake. So I just thought, why would we keep water up in there? Why not put all into the dam, into the same source? Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Councillor Beal, certainly. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you very much for the presentation and the update and the information. I really appreciate it. I have and I wanted to focus the questions on this particular topic and leave the aquifer and groundwater conservation separately. I was curious, first of all, and forgive me, everybody here who already knows this, but I don't recall if the South Englishman River flows into the Englishman above or below the clay banks. Can you answer that? Can somebody here answer that?
My understanding is that it flows in above the clay banks.
That's what I was afraid of. That's what I thought, but I was thinking, oh, I just haven't been up there recently, so I couldn't recall. Okay. I just thought that would eliminate a little bit of an area of some friction, let's say, regarding water treatment plant. But my questions are also about Shelton and Healy, and the information you've given has helped a bit with that. But presumably they would not be combined in a way as a phased approach, but that if one went with Healy, that is basically drawing from Shelton as well as it feeds into Healy, would that be correct? So in fact, if one looked at Healy, then that is drawing on that whole area, correct? Okay, thank
That's
you.
correct.
And another question, again, for clarification, you know, hearing the mayor speak and yourself speak about the side stream storage, I've just, I guess I've been a little bit perplexed, like, how is that really different from what's being looked at here in terms of providing a dam and gathering an area that is storage that is then released as needed and over time. Although perhaps I guess the spillover part is not necessarily released, utilized for the city, but nonetheless, depending on the size of the dam, that actually provides storage. So is really the difference in terms of considering something like that? Is it around regulatory requirements, if I may, from the province, or is it around water licenses? Or if one had something like side stream storage, would that not also need some kind of water license? I'm just not understanding why one would look at that if we are able to provide enough storage of water with one of the options that you put forward.
Yeah, so I think. So I'll just clarify in terms of the first part of your question. Yes, so for Shelton and Healy, they were both coming from the same watershed. And there could be the potential of having, so one larger dam at Healy or two smaller dams, one at Shelton, one at Healy. So there are some potential options there. But again, sort of similar to Aerosmith, it's all coming from the same watershed. So the total volume that's available is the same, no matter where you're storing it. I'll stick on that side. So for the licensing, because it is in its new storage, there'd be a new dam. There would be a requirement for a new license for the structure. And the license needs to define both what the location, the volume, and the use, the intended use. And so in this particular case, there would be a component of it for community demand and withdrawal. And the other component of it would be for storage to supplement flows in the South Englishman River. Because the storage is located on the South Englishman, there would be an expectation that there would be additional flows provided on top of what's required for the community. So that's why there's more storage. And the main reason for that is because you'd be releasing the flow during the summer period when the flows are low, when the base flows are low. And for the east coast of the island, essentially the policy is that you provide if you're withdrawing water during that time, then there's enough storage to be able to support the withdrawal as well as an environmental flow need. For the off-channel storage, the intent there would be that the water be withdrawn during the period when there's higher flow. And so there may still be, that's one thing I can't comment on, is like there might still be the need for additional environmental flow needs potentially with that. That would need some further discussion with the regulator on that one. But the intent would be that the water would be withdrawn in the winter when the flows are higher, and then stored in a location in a pond that would then be used through the summer period. And I guess from a technical perspective, the difference would be that the pond, an off-channel pond would require, you would be constructing the volume by excavating and berming, like essentially creating a dugout, a really large dugout, or a series of dugouts. Versus using a natural feature and a dam to be able to provide the storage. And so there's sort of the main differences are just sort of the footprint, the incremental footprint of the storage area. So if we're looking at, say, Shelton, for example, There's already a lake there, and so the lake would be bigger, but it would, the incremental size of that would be less than what a new pond would be. So that there's other considerations there too. And so there's land considerations, environmental considerations. At the same time, off-channel storage, you would sort of remove those potential regulatory, if there was a good location, you could remove some of the other regulatory environmental concerns around raising a lake. So raising a lake, there are concerns about how does that affect the riparian area? What kind of impact does that have on the land? Like there's the landowner. Whereas providing off-stream storage, you're eliminating some of that because it's separated from the riparian zone. There could be other terrestrial considerations in terms of changing that habitat from terrestrial to aquatic, but there's a trade-off there.
You mentioned, also mentioned the potential water quality concerns. So would need to be some detailed study on how that would be impacted, storing water and not having outflow from it or no movement in that water. Yeah.
Councillor Wood, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I sent a slide to staff. I'm hoping that they got it. I wasn't really planning to speak to this. This is, it's with regards to environmental flow needs. And so in your presentation today, we saw that the flow in the river during the drought periods or the dry season is actually better because there's a dam. And so I think we have some misconceptions about what the dam means. And yes, there's environmental concerns when we're going to build the dam. We saw a lot of that with Site C. You know, you're flooding farmland and you're never going to use that land again, et cetera, et cetera. So where we build the dam, there's definitely environmental concerns. But I pulled a bunch of data that's public data as to how the river has done since we were pulling the data. And you can see that it was very low, lower than before the dam. And now the dam actually makes it obviously better than it was before we were holding water up there. You can also, I put population growth on here too. And the idea seems to be that if we can flow more water from upland, we're actually making it better for the rivers. It's not worse. It is better. The dams make the rivers and, you know, the environment for the fish better. And so I think there's a misconception that we built the dam and things got worse. You can see by the data that the river used to be much more dry. And if we weren't releasing water from the dam right now, there'd be a trickle. And so I just wanted to mention that when we're talking about environmental needs, if there was Shelton or Healy or whatever options up there, that if we build more upstream water storage and be releasing it, the lower down on the watershed is healthier, not worse, because we get to control a little bit and add a little bit more water when there wouldn't have been naturally. I'd love to see us plan for zero snowpack. If we get years with snowpack, great. With more, you know, that's natural upland water storage is how I kind of look at it. I think I mentioned that to you guys before. But I would love to hear your thoughts on if I'm on the right track, data looks right to you, you know, is that what dams actually do? Do they make lower on the watershed? Do they make the rivers actually healthier than they would be naturally?
Yeah, no, thanks, Councillor Wood, for your question. Yeah, so again, I'm going to focus on the Englishman. Dams as a whole is definitely a broader question, but for the Englishman River specifically, yes, the dam has provided storage in the upland that is providing increased flows for almost the entire main stem of the Englishman River. And there are two parts to that. One is it's increasing what the flows were downstream of the intake. to be able to provide benefit for that, for the intake down to the ocean. But the other piece is the water that the community is using is flowing all the way down the river before it's getting withdrawn. And that water is also benefiting upstream. By like alternatively, when the dam was constructed, there could have been a pipeline that was constructed all the way down from the dam to the community, and that water wouldn't have gone into the river. So there's a benefit. It's a co-benefit. So there's a benefit to the community and a benefit to the river. And so for Shelton and Healy, there would be that benefit to then the South Englishman as well. But that would need to be looked at and offset against what are some of the concerns around raising the water level in the lake. And that trade-off. It's about considering those trade-offs. Yeah.
Can I, sorry, add to that, Councilor Wood, just in regard to the a new project also, there could be benefit. There obviously we're talking about benefits to the environment. There could be opportunity to seek funding from other sources too, where environmental agencies or such that to promote that water usage downstream for the environment.
Yeah, so if there's that co-benefit of an environmental benefit and a community benefit, there could be some additional potential funding sources if it's showing that it's providing benefit for habitat, for aquatic habitat. Yeah.
And then, my follow-up, and I don't know how the regulators operate, but if I were a regulator, I would be balancing the environmental concerns of, raising the level of the lake and what happens way upstream versus the obvious benefits to the river, fish habitat, et cetera, downstream. And if the feds and the province want us to build more housing, well, obviously water supply is part of our infrastructure that we provide here. And so if I were a regulator, I'd be like, yeah, the water level is going to go up at whatever, location we choose. But the benefits far outweigh for the environmental flow needs, for the community, they far outweigh that. And so I don't know how regulators, who is that? I don't know how they typically operate. And maybe you guys as engineers, maybe you could shed some light on what they look at when they are balancing these decisions.
Yeah, so there are really sort of three areas, I guess, broadly, that the regulator's looking at on the water licensing side anyway. So one is, the first is there enough water, technically. The second is, would issuing the license impact any of the rights holders? So that's property rights, other water rights holders, First Nations land title, and making sure because the province needs to consult and with First Nations. So there's the First Nations component to the question in terms of making sure that the community is on board with what the direction is. And then there's also the environmental component. And to some extent, the social component as well. So there's usually a development plan that's prepared by the proponent. So whoever's applying for the license needs to put together a document that kind of outlines the benefits and the costs of each of those components. And then it's up to the regulator to go either yes, like I concur that the overall for those different components, that the benefit is to issue the license, or no, it's not, or there's the middle of need more information, right? And so that's essentially the process for the licensing. And then on the DFO side, it's really more focused on the main sort of test is, are the actions being taken? Are they altering or destroying fish habitat? So that's their test in terms of issuing a license under the Fisheries Act. So they're really focused, like their focus is really on the aquatic habitat, and are the actions being taken, are they going to impact and like either alter or destroy habitat in any way.
Thank you very much for answering those. And to your last point, yeah, I'm not a biologist, so I don't understand like if we're actually adding more water to the habitat than would naturally be there. So I don't quite understand the environmental flow needs, which are higher than historically what it would be. But thank you for answering those, and thank you to staff for throwing that slide up. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll just throw in just a comment anyways. Just spitballing here. I hung around in Calgary a little while in my youth and so forth. What is the use for the Glenmore Dam? Are you familiar with the Glenmore Dam? It's right in the middle of Calgary. Well, Calgary's grown all around the Glenmore, and Heritage Park is right beside it there, the huge subdivision and so forth. But are you familiar with the Glenmore? Is it actually flood control, like all the problems they've had in Calgary and the flood control, but are they actually using it as a storage for their potable water?
Yeah, so I know a little bit about it, so I'm going to qualify that.
Right.
But I think my understanding is it's twofold. So there is some storage for flood control to some extent. And then also, like, my understanding is they do use Glenmore as one of their water supplies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of those, like, as we say, a phased. Let's put a reservoir here because we have the land here and it's right adjacent to probably the Bow River anyways, they're right there. So
Yeah.
Good planning.
And yeah, and I know, like, relatively recently, my understanding is they've also provided some additional flood relief through a new system that allows the water to flow out into the floodplain, which is agricultural land.
Right.
And then slowly release back into the elbow before flowing down into Glenmore. And I think that was just recently tested with the recent rains. And I believe that they're sort of evaluating what the water quality impacts of that have been. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly. I did a tour with FCM anyways back in Calgary anyways 2 years ago, and I saw the results of that management of the stormwater, and it was huge. But they had to do it because they had a disaster a few years previous on that.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Just a quick question. I'll go to the second line speakers in a second here. We're going to be looking for direction from council anyways to say where we want to go on phase 2 soon here. Just in your estimation, if we took just a simple approach for phase 2, as I was suggesting, just come up with a storage solution or something like that. We're talking budget here. You know, we have, I understand, $431,000 left in our budget anyways that we have allocated for this study. Could that just that portion and not do anything else that was suggested? Would that be able to be done for within our budget?
So just to, in terms of clarifying, so looking specifically at the off-stream storage,
Yes.
and just that component of it, yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. In terms of the broader sort of ideas, that's going to depend a little bit on the scope, but that piece of the scope, yes.
I would expect it would be
Yeah.
within that, but just from your past work, all you had to do on that, but I just don't assume anything unless you get the answer. Thanks for that, Greg.
Yeah.
Councillor Gore has another question.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, and Councillor Grant, you want to follow up too, Councillor Gore, and then over to you. Yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned about the potential to withdraw from the aquifers. And looking at the studies of the aquifer that have been done by the RDN, we see that our aquifers are stressed. I think 216 is not coming back up as quickly as we would like it to. But also the interconnectedness of the groundwater and the surface flow. So I want to make sure we are doing it responsibly. We just don't think that the groundwater, let's take it all, because that will eventually also impact the surface flow in the Englishman. So do you still think the aquifer is a viable option and not impacting the base flow in the Englishman? And 216, in your opinion, is it healthy? Is it able to recharge as quickly as we would like, so we can use this as a viable option as a water source?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll kind of qualify on that. So our groundwater hydrologist, so Waterline, they evaluated the data and in their opinion, that there is potential to help supplement the community withdrawal, but there isn't enough to provide all of the water needs for the community. So there's appears to be at a high level in terms of with the data that to be able to supplement, but not to be able to provide, there's not a sufficient to be able to just rely on the groundwater. So
Right. And just to clarify, I think that withdrawal to supplement is expected in the summer months. That's when also the river is more stressed. And in my opinion, I think even the aquifers would be at their lowest. So maybe there's a sweet spot that you can get that number right in terms of the aquifer, like I said, without impacting the aquifers also, help the surface flow. So we're not impacting that. Okay, thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, I just mentioned as well, Councillor Gore, recently at the RDN, Erica put a presentation to us anyways about the water, confirming that Parksville our 19 wells are using aquifer 216. And also, but had other data suggesting that our wells actually were not being stressed. Actually, they were regular. They hadn't dropped. In fact, a couple had actually improved. And it's right in the report from Murray was there as well with for aquifer 216. I just had to pull up the stats anyways here on that. Actually, our Springwood well field is actually doing well. Not stressing because of climate change at this time. Councillor Grens, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And actually, separate from my questions, I am a bit confused on some of this terminology. When we speak about an aquifer being stressed, am I correct that actually refers to the number of straws, so to speak, that are permitted to be in that aquifer, as opposed to the amount of water that's in the aquifer? It's just the potential to draw from the aquifer as opposed to the ability of the aquifer to supply that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a combination there where the term for an aquifer being stressed, again, I'm not a hydrologist or a hydrogeologist either, but my understanding is that the rate of recovery of the aquifer level is declining, or it's not coming back as quickly as it used to, type of thing. But my understanding is since or prior to the water treatment plant being in place, the groundwater usage was higher than it is today. And since that time, there's more surface water through the water treatment plant such that the groundwater has recovered a little bit better, and such that there's the water levels, looking at the data that we had for the study, and it's within, I think, Waterlines appendix within the study. It shows sort of increasing trends of groundwater levels in several of the city's well points.
Because that's how you could say that the aquifer is both stressed and recovering. Because that's what it's, I think, described as, right? So,
That's right.
so it's stressed in that there are a lot of draws on that aquifer.
Mhm.
There's a lot of potential that could be using the aquifer, not just the city of Parksville, but a number of wells are using that aquifer. But the actual overall trajectory of the aquifer is that it's recovering. Is that correct?
I think we'd have to review it further, yeah,
Okay, that's just what I've seen and what I think the report is kind of indicating.
Yep.
Maybe Murray wants to step in on that, yeah.
So the concept of aquifer stress, at least in how we treat it in our water budget studies that we do in the RDN, is more of a mass balance thing. So it's not looking at the number of straws in the aquifer, it's looking at how much water is withdrawn compared to how much water is recharged to the aquifer, using lots of elaborate models that I don't understand either. So the concept of the stress level of the aquifer and whether the aquifer is stable or recovering or diminishing, those are two different things. So one is based on a mass balance and the other one's based on a relatively long-term trend. And I think what you've all said here is really accurate in 216. It's a very heavily utilized aquifer, and it's highly stressed from a mass balance perspective, but it is recovering particularly locally in the around Springwood, because the city hasn't been using that water for 5 years at any great amount. So there's two quite different concepts there.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I think it's pretty important to understand because I get as much as possible to understand because there's a difference between I guess like having a bank account that has a lot of people doing withdrawals from the bank account, but that doesn't speak to whether the bank account's being replenished with cash or not. So you could say it's stressed and that there are a lot of people with debit cards out there on that bank account, but that doesn't speak to whether there's enough in the bank account to supply all those cards. So anyway, that was a little tangent there. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for that, Murray. I think one of the overarching questions that the community has on this whole topic is speaks to why are there so frequent watering restrictions put in place and they seem to kind of come more frequently than they used to. Maybe can you get into what the findings are where that would be attributed? And to what extent is it climate change? To what extent is it population? And on the population side, would you say that the population of Parksville has been increasing at a higher or as expected or lower rate than what the previous, like I think 2011 plan was expecting? So maybe you can sort of circle around those topics. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll follow up on the first part of the question there in terms of the changes that we've been seeing. I'm not sure if we've got a copy of the report up that could be shown, but there's let me just double check the what page it's on, but just give me 1 second. Yeah, so I think it's on page 6-4, I think.
Page of the PDF.
Yes. I'll see if I can find it. Apologies for the delay. I think this would just be, it's a helpful image to help explain what's going on. Yeah, so it's page
Got the one there, Greg?
yeah, that one will work. So actually there should be another one. Is it this one? Yeah, here we go. It's figure 6-6. It's on page 57, I think. Yeah, that one there. So this is a graph. Next one down. Yeah, that's it there. Perfect. Thank you. So thanks for your patience and bringing that up. It just helps with explaining what's going on. So this is a graph showing flow in the Englishman River. With the orange line being sort of conditions between 2007 and 2015, and the green line being conditions between 2016 and now. So roughly 10-year periods. And down at the bottom of the chart, you can see those two areas that are highlighted in orange and in green. And the The dashed line below those, it is showing what the base flow in the river, so this is the average, so what the base flow in the river would be if there weren't releases from the dam. And the area between those two, so that orange area and the green area is representing the volume of storage that is being released from the dam over time. And so there's a couple of things going on. One is over time, the rate that the water level is dropping in the spring isn't really changing very much, but it's happening sooner in the year. And the second is that the base flow, the ultimate low point, is also getting lower. So the amount of water that's being released from the dam to support both the environmental flow needs, as well as the environmental flow needs is increasing over time. And then on top of that, there are the community withdrawals, because that the solid line shown would be the flow in the river, like just upstream of the intake, right? So just before the water gets withdrawn. So that includes both the community withdrawal and the EFN. Yeah, so there is the data is showing it's changing. And there are a number of reasons for that. There are climate change reasons for that. There are some increase in demand over time because of the warmer years and warmer summers, higher demand for irrigation, as well as there have been the ways that the watershed is used in terms of the land use, does have impact on flows. It's hard to quantify that. It's really difficult to quantify it, but there can be changes. So things are changing, and that's the data is showing that there have been significant changes in the watershed, even in a fairly short amount of time over the last 20 years, in terms of the volume of water that's now required to support both the environmental flow need and the community. And there's only, like the bank account analogy, there's $7 million in the bank account. And the withdrawals are getting higher. So it's just the amount of water that's available is at the dam. So in order to reduce the amount of withdrawals, both the community demand and the environmental flow need have both been reduced, need to be reduced in order to sort of conserve that storage for over the longer period. Because you can also see how much longer the releases are from the dam as well. Yeah.
So there's a second part of that question. Thank you as well, that maybe I'll let you get to. But before that part, it could be other things I didn't mention as well, like maybe like forestry practices upstream, or changes in the land geographically, or whatever, that the water is not necessarily making its way down where it used to, hydrogeology or whatever. So there are a number of factors that could affect that. But then it does raise the question around whether the provincial legislation, sort of the agreement around the water license, is still appropriate, given where things have changed since that was put in place. And on that as well is that the flow requirement that does trigger the need to put in watering restrictions, that gauge, is measuring the post human use number, right? So the gauge is past the intake, but we have to provide, but the flow rate that we're expected to provide based on the provincial operating licenses that happens, that amount includes the human use and the EFN, right? What is the number that we have to provide for the habitat?
Yeah, so currently the based on ongoing conversations with the regulator, with the First Nation, there's an agreement right now on a temporary basis to establish the flow downstream of the intake. So the flow in the river from the intake to the ocean, where the gauge is located, is 1 cubic meter per second. And so the flow upstream of the intake is 1 meter per second plus whatever the community is using at the time. And so it's that 1 cubic meter per second doesn't include the community withdrawal. It's in addition to the community withdrawal, or the community withdrawal is in addition to that, I guess is maybe another way of putting it. And the amount that you're having that's being released from the dam needs to both provide the community withdrawal as well as maintain 1 cubic meter per second. It's not necessarily, it's not releasing the full 1 cubic meter per second. There is a contribution from the base flows in the river that are adding to that. But it's the measurement point in that 1 cubic meter per second.
Yeah, I'm talking about the
downstream.
point at which it's measured.
Yeah.
That being 1 cubic meter per second. But that 1 cubic meter per second, sorry, are you saying that is including both uses or just the EFN?
Just the EFN.
Because somewhere else, I think it was in the report, I think it was more around 0.7 to 0.9. And then also if we look back to the graph that Councillor Wood provided, is that in fact, prior to the dam, the flow rates were much lower than even that. So, and I'm not a biologist, I know you're not a biologist either, but I do understand that there is a certain level of dynamics to a river that are natural and that are healthy for habitat from the ecologists that I do speak to. So that having a continuous flat flow rate throughout the whole year may not actually be the optimal habitat creating flow rate. But that may be the assumption that is being when that deal was put in place those years ago, that may have been the science at the time, but is that still the science? So that's where I'm saying, and this may be beyond your purview, but it seems to me that we may be able to, the fact that the watering restrictions and the reliability that this whole report hinges on is potentially based on the water license with the province that itself, and I know staff is looking into this, may need to be looked at as a way to actually increase the reliability if we don't have to put in stage 4 watering restrictions, because it's not due to the fact that the watering restrictions aren't based on the use of the community that much as they are based on the flow in the river. So, and that water license, that the letter of the law, that sort of bureaucratic requirement that may or may not be current science. I don't know, this is some ponderings and maybe beyond your purview.
I'll provide some comments on it from the hydrology side. So and sort of based on some of the previous work that has been done and I've been involved with. So the 0.7 cubic meters per second, that's been established as the critical environmental flow need. So that's essentially, it's been established that a flow below that rate will incrementally start to cause impacts to the habitat. So it would kind of go from it being fair, let's say, to poor on a scale. So the 1 cubic meter per second. So, and then that was established by DFO back in the 90s when the dam was first constructed. There was a study done as part of the construction for the new intake that did habitat simulation modeling for the reach of the river from the intake to the ocean. And essentially what that's looking at is what is the value of that habitat from a habit productivity perspective versus the flow. And it's kind of like a hockey stick. And interestingly, the modeling was showing that 0.7 is about right in terms of that critical point where the value of the habitat for the different fish species really starts to drop off. The only one that isn't is the par, which are sort of that intermediate stage of the fish. And it's really more of a kind of a straight line. So like for them, it's sort of like more flow is better, right? And so it's trying to find that happy balance of what is what's appropriate. And based on conversations with the regulators, and it's not just the regulatory biologist, it's also the fisheries biologists at at the province and at DFO. There's been agreement that 1 cubic meter per second is a suitable target. The original EFN was established based on a policy. I'm not sure of the status of that policy anymore, but it used to be based on a metric that was 10% of the mean annual flow in the river is what the flow should be. And that was based on some studies that have been done across BC and in the States around looking at what a sort of suitable target should be. And that was what that was established at. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I believe it was about 1.2 was what was originally established. So just in terms of like that, the new one is actually a little bit below that now. And so, yeah, so and also based on that habitat simulation modeling, 1 cubic meter per second is a reasonable target to provide reasonable habitat function in the river. But granted, it is higher than what used to be there before in the natural system. Yeah. But I can't get into sort of the benefits of that, both sort of locally for the watershed, but also regionally, because it's sort of, there's both of those kind of two components to that.
Okay, council, I'm going to, I'll be striving to adjourn by 12:30, but at that time, I want time anyways to make the recommendations as well. I'm going to take a couple more questions, but please keep it brief if you can. Councillor Fraz has his hand up. Councillor Fraz, Councillor Beal, and Councillor Martin. Okay, go.
I'll try to keep mine quick. I just wanted to know about the spillover of the dam. If you have any information that we can see like this, where it shows how frequently, what time periods we've had that spillover. So if we're considering raising the dam, I'd like to know when is that opportunity and how much opportunity are we looking at?
Yeah, so I think if we go back to the previous slide, it has the water levels over time. So this is a short. So the orange, and the green lines are also showing like the median water levels in the reservoir. And when the reservoir is full at the top of the graph there, that's when it's filling. So in most years, it does fill, but there are some years where it hasn't. And that's that sort of gray dashed line along the bottom. That's the minimum lake level that's been recorded on that specific day. So it's not.
Does this have a time frame associated with it? Like, what are we?
Yeah. So the lower gray dashed line. Yeah, is the minimum water level. And so there have been years in the historical record where the lake hasn't refilled because of limitations in the inflow. And those would really be what would drive the reliability for the system. So on average, yeah, there is sufficient flow. But it's those year-over-year drought conditions where it wouldn't refill or may not refill.
Do we have any idea how much spillover we're talking about there too? Because if it's just reaching the top, it could, we call it spillover, but with barely any versus it's spilling over a ton.
Yeah. So again, I'm just going from memory from work, but the total volume is about 9 million cubic meters. So there's 7 million cubic meters of active storage, and there's 2 million cubic meters of emergency storage. And the reason why it's emergency storage is because it has a limited amount of flow that can be released, and it doesn't meet the environmental flow need target. So there's 9 million cubic meters of total storage. The average inflow on an annual basis to the Arrowsmith watershed, and this is based on data like before the dam was constructed. So that's in the 90s, I believe, was in around 12 to 14. So it's a fairly, like, that 9 million is a pretty large percentage of the average. So there's that extra, say, like anywhere from 4 to 6 million extra on average in a year, but that's the average. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Beal and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again. I guess I'm going to go back to Councillor Gore's sweet spot idea. And I guess what I'm hoping for, in fact, what I am hoping for is that we could eventually end up with upland storage that will be sufficient to provide the EFN as well as additional waters for the community for a longer period than we have, allowing for even no snowpack, but longer drought, et cetera, as well as looking at our aquifer. And one of the notions in our OCP is that we would be a sustainable city. So part of that, I think, for me means that we're not actually going to other aquifers, that we're doing everything that we can to improve the health of the aquifer that we have. And I don't know if much of that would be within phase 2, if it was with your company. It also may be things that we can be doing, you know, at the city level, but I do believe that there's more that we could be doing. But nonetheless, looking at that upland storage and providing more water for the community should also allow the aquifer to further recharge, as well as additional conservation methods. And I do think that we need to continue to look at conservation, and a couple of points that Councillor Grenz has made around, you know, values and going forward in 10, 20, 30 years, you know, what does the ideal yard look like? I don't know. But is that something that, you know, having those two parts come together of both upland storage for the health of the river and also allowing for a healthier aquifer without having to go outside the one that we're using now?
Did you want to provide comment on that first side?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, at this point, we're looking at optimizing the existing groundwater usage within the existing license volume available. So yeah, for the long term, if there is a new storage water source provided or constructed, then the groundwater use would probably stay similar as it is today. And if we're in a sort of inclining trend or improving to be more healthy, then hopefully that would continue.
Okay, great.
And my understanding is that that some of the steps that could be taken within the city, both on city land as well on private land, could in fact increase the amount of groundwater that is, you know, rainwater that is going into the ground. And that in turn should also improve the health of local streams and ultimately get to the river as well, would it not?
Councillor, but yeah, absolutely. Any further stormwater management practices that would encourage infiltration are definitely of benefit, and of course the water conservation in itself to sort of beef up your existing water conservation program to use less water during the summer months and allow for it to exist where it is.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really would like to see if you would give us a B, or C. What would be the most, not necessarily the cheapest, the most practical long-term solution to this? Because I was hoping today that we would have that, because you're the professionals that know. You've given us a report, but a decision to understand what would be best for us. And like Councillor Fraz was saying, not necessarily the cheapest, but the wisest for long-term, because we're going a long-term for this. So do you have any solutions that you can give us? What should we do? Really? The practical thing, smart thing? Because that's what I would
That's
like.
long.
Well, a report. This is a big report, and you understand it way more than any one of us. So what would you do if you were making that decision?
Yeah, what would you do?
Thank you. Yes,
Okay.
Martin.
good.
So one of the challenges is that unfortunately there's not kind of a clear solution in the level of the analysis that was done. And so I think in terms of the decision for me, if it was my decision to be making, would be to kind of go to that next step of evaluating the options that have been identified in this preliminary study in a bit more detail. It's not, there isn't sort of a clear direction at this point because of at the level of which this study was preliminary to kind of set the next stage for that phase 2, was to sort of help with firstly sort of establishing how much water is needed. And then secondly, start to look at some options. But there's more work needed to be able to make that final decision.
So you can't give us options, okay?
No.
Because I know
Going to a
our
resolution.
citizens are concerned, and we are, and we want to make sure we're doing the wisest thing, that's all.
Yeah.
So we have to, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's, I'm gonna have to wrap it up. These people probably have other work to go back to their job, but council, I'm going to be looking for a recommendation resolution anyways, to just my belief is we've had a lot of good comments and there's a lot of understanding anyways of what is possible. And I understand phase 2, there was a list of things that they could possibly look at, would be looking in that direction. But I'm suggesting at this particular time that we have KWL look at the possibilities, as we spoke earlier, of just the side stream storage option, which then once we have that question answered, then there may be some money left over. Then we look at what we do with that information, but we have to have that, as to say that if we had side stream storage with reservoir capacity is going to in charge, protect or improve our aquifers, which is one of our goals as well, as Councilor Beal has mentioned, which is good. At the same time, it may delay us actually have to look for more groundwater sources at the same time. I think we have to have that question answered first before we make the decisions, before we go anywhere further. And I would suggest if I could make that recommendation as to continuing on with phase 2 as a phased approach. And with phase 2 would just consist of that. And then that would be brought back to council with that information. And then we say, okay, where are we going to either make this happen? And then we make the recommendations for that. Do I have approval for council to second that motion? Yeah. For recommendation would be that the KWL look into the options for the side stream storage of the excess fall and winter rains to provide a phased approach for reservoirs in the vicinity of Parksville instead of up on the highlands, possibly considering looking at industrial land that we have in our industrial park as a portion of it, as well as mosaic lands, which is the next closest, because we don't have crown lands here, we have privately owned lands. So just looking at those options first.
Second it.
Thank you, Councilor Fraz. Any
Keep in
further
mind, this is committee of the whole, so this recommendation to council.
It is this just recommendation from COTW, then we'll go to council. Okay. Okay, yeah, go ahead on the motion on the floor. Thank you. Yeah, yes, go ahead, Councilor Beal.
Oh, thank you. I'm just wondering if, is it also make some sense to perhaps have an alternate recommendation so that if this one is not supported, that there's something else that would come forward? Or are we going to be sort of pre-voting on the recommendation so that then we have a motion to take to the actual meeting? I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
not clear on that.
I agree. And having made that motion, I think KWL understands that that's what I'm looking for. As Councilor Martin says, we want a solution. And Councilor Martin's right. So we want your solution. That would include that. And if the side storage doesn't pan out to be looking like a good suggestion, I think KWL is going to come back and say, however, speaking to the solution, we recommend this. And I think you understand that that's what we're looking at, Craig, is that, guys, you know.
So
yeah.
a quick follow-up. One thing that I heard earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it would be more likely to access provincial or federal funding if we were going with one of the other options that would look at the creation of upland storage, because that in fact directly affects then the environmental flow needs and involves DFO, et cetera. Now, did I misunderstand that, or was that correct?
I think that's a possibility, but that's exactly what it is. It's a possibility that you may get provincial help on that, which is actually well, I can't comment further because it's in camera, but on another Aerosmith meeting, the AWS and meeting previous. So it's a possibility. You're right, Councillor Beal. Councillor Frass, go ahead.
Okay, just going to speak on this as a seconder. I think where we're at right now as a committee of whole, that this, support this motion because it's looking at an option for it. And since it wasn't part of the report, for us to then be able to pick through where we're going to go, we're going to have more information onto where does that weigh into it. But when I look at all these options and try to think long-term, I think there's going to be more than one option that's going to come forward over the years. And so it's a little bit more of like, which order are we going to stack them in? Because I don't think this is the last time that we're going to be looking at water solutions for the community here. So as far as side stream storage, we need to consider what that looks like. I'm not supporting this as the option we're moving forward on. I'm putting it into the pile, and then I think we need to be looking at it as at our council table. But for right now, I need more information on it. I think it's worthy consideration. I don't understand the full implications of it. So I want to support our committee of the whole so that it can be in the mix.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And I agree 100%, Councillor Frass. I'd say that if KWL comes back to us and says side stream storage, where you live, where the water is not an option, eliminate it. That's what I want to hear. That's part of like, let's just take that off the table. And then we'll look for your other magic solution you pull up instead of. I have great faith in you guys. Councillor Doran.
Thank you. Through the mayor to our delegation. Can you perhaps make it very clear to me, was the side stream storage your number one option that you suggested to council? Because what I saw in the presentation was Shelton Healy, which was previously identified as one of the viable options, was also presented. And thank you, Councillor Wood, for doing the work on this as well. I would rather prefer us go to that option, explore that one further, in addition to looking at raising the Aerosmith Dam, which I think staff is also recommending in the report. Those would be two options that I would support at this time, even though it is just the committee of the whole. But I think having the experts, you've already done the work. I did not see the side stream options as being the most viable. And I'm sorry if I missed that. It's been a long meeting, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so in terms of going through the multiple accounts evaluation that we did, those two options came out a little bit higher than Fishtail, and we had removed the off-stream storage as to go through like at the preliminary screening stage because of the costs and land, like the relative costs and the land implications. So like the highest ranking sites were Shelton and Healy that came out through the evaluation. So not saying that that's necessarily, again, looking at those individually, it's not necessarily the total correct solution on a phased approach, but it appeared to be the correct solutions in terms of balancing across all the different criteria that we're looking at. In terms of the direction to go.
Thank you. If I may follow up.
So if we could rephrase it to say that the possible solutions could include looking at the Healy and Aerosmith Dam.
Shelton, Healy Lake, and raising the Aerosmith Dam storage.
Okay?
Well, that would be a separate motion altogether, it looks like it. CAO. So.
Oh, hi. CAO Kaler.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you, Mayor, through you. I just wanted to remind council, we did have a motion that was presented that was deferred for consideration until after the committee of the whole takes place. And so what we will be looking for at some point is kind of what Councillor Gore is talking about and what you've been talking about, Mayor Brian, is an order of priority for that phase 2. So what we wrote just for council's recommendation, or sorry, to remind council, the recommendation was that council consider the priorities and timing for the water use planning and management study phase 2 scope of work, and it was deferred until after this committee of the whole, and that we would get a quote from Kerwood Lydell on that scope. So if there's 5 things that council wants to be advanced, we would be then working with the consultant to get a quote on whether that 430 remainder meets that budget. So just as a reminder of kind of the next
Understood.
step.
Right. So I would hope that with the amended motion anyways, I would do exactly that.
So, sorry, Mayor, I think that looks like, CEO, you can correct me, but this motion is very different than the original motion from the mayor, which is a very different direction. So is it a new motion? We'll have to vote on this unless, Mayor, you want to withdraw and present this as an option?
No, what it is actually just defining instead of phase two, the planned one was a whole bunch of options. If you look at what it was huge.
Yeah.
And including conservation and piping and infrastructure and so forth. I don't want to touch that right
Yeah.
now. That's why I want to define it. We have to focus and define this right now, people. And if it means for your satisfaction.
Yeah.
That we include the possibility of the Healy, Shelton, and also aquifer Aerosmith storage. I'm definitely in favor of amending my motion to that. Councillor Fraz, do you agree to the amending?
I had a different thought and question here in
Oh,
mind.
go ahead.
But also to amend it though, can we not have separate ones come out of here though? Like we can have separate offers. They don't have to all be brought together under one. I think your motion to bring this
Oh, you
information
mean
is-
that's what you want? Two motions, like one?
Yeah,
one
yeah,
for
I
site
mean,
storage and then-
we can bring multiple recommendations out of the committee
Okay.
here, and I think we should. In this case, I believe that we're asking for this information on the side storage. It sounds like you guys had already done some work on it and it just didn't meet the criteria in the cut, so it wasn't included, but it should seem like an easy one to bring back now. If we're just saying, hey, that information that you put aside, let's bring it back in the report so we can look at it. I think that's,
Good
I
okay.
think it's an easy,
Okay, good suggestion. Let's leave the original motion on the floor and then we'll look for another motion on the floor to do an additional one. Does that work for you, Councillor Kerr?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, speaking to the motion on the floor. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And given the fact that when I had read the report earlier and when we had presentations earlier and that the side stream storage was not recommended due to costs and the amount of land that would be needed, et cetera, for all of those reasons, with respect to the mayor, I can't support this.
Thank you. Councillor Wood, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start by saying I understand why the side stream storage seems to make sense on the surface of it because we have so much water that flows down all winter. Hey, can we save some of it? But when I try to get my head around the amount of water and the size of the hole that's 3 or 4 meters deep, for the engineering of this, from the people I've spoken to in this report, it just is prohibitively expensive with permitting and everything else. And at first I thought it was a good idea, but I just can't support this. My take is I'd love to see this committee make 3 recommendations to our regular council meeting. One is for a water conservation plan. And one is for upland storage, and we need, either C or D estimates to get grants or other funding. Those could be for raising the existing Aerosmith Dam as well as Shelton and Healy Lakes. And then the third one is to provide some grant research to see what's available for senior government funding, because what I don't want to see is the majority of this being on property taxes. So those are the 3 that I'd like to see, but that's aside from your motion, but I can't support side stream storage. Thanks.
Don't you think we could include that in the next phase after we have this initial, like I'm trying to keep it very simple here, Councillor Wood, is I'm trying to keep it just for the storage and so forth. And then we're going to get that information back. Let's you can't see it working in reservoirs. I have people advising me on the outside that it will work. Okay. But I want now the experts to tell us whether it's possible to work. So let's let them tell us what it's going to be, not our sources on the outside that say it should work. Absolutely. Let's eliminate that or approve it. That's all I'm asking for here. We can't, just bypass it and go to the next phase and so. But anyways, that's why it's here. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I'm kind of envisioning, to answer your question, Mayor, I'm kind of envisioning these would probably be 2 different RFPs. One is for a company to do a water conservation plan.
No,
Um,
no, not in this motion here.
No,
No, that
No.
would follow through in phase 2 after we get this preliminary information.
yeah. And then a second RFP for Class C or D upland water storage for raising Aerosmith Dam Shelton and Healy Lakes. And then the third motion would just be to staff to look at the provincial funding, but I can't support this motion as it is. Thanks.
Councillor Fries?
So through the mayor to council, I think the important part of this motion though is that when we move forward from here, this idea will still exist. And the people that weren't here in the meeting today or hear that, oh, this, you know, we've considered it. There's nothing that we can point to and say, look, there's the work and why it's not a good option. I think we need to be able to put it to bed or it'll just keep resurfacing again and again. So this isn't to suggest that this is the option that we're going to go with, but if this information didn't make it to the report, let's bring it into there so that we can cross it off the list. We have something to point to. Otherwise, just hearsay over and over, and it'll keep coming back for years. Like I said, this is not going to be the last time we're dealing with the water issue. And I'm sure this idea will just surface again. And if it doesn't make the report again, it will just be back to the square one. So I think let's get the information and then we can cross it off the list if it's really not going to work out.
One more, Councillor Gore.
Yes, just a quick comment to our CAO. We want all this information. I'm not against the information, but we are working with a budget. As you mentioned, about $440,000, and I don't want to put you on the spot to give a quote on this. But the more information we seek, the more we draw into that money that we have. And if we have these big options, do you think, in your opinion, we'll be able to get that information on what the three information we seek from Councillor Wood just mentioned and the side stream storage? Would we be able to get all this information within the budget for the phase 2 that we have?
If I may, through the mayor.
Oh, Kaylor.
Sorry, thank you. The motion that we presented to council was to work with the consultant to get a budget on the scope that you recommend as council. And I assume the more work they have to do, the more money it will cost.
Yeah, I've already asked that question. It was very first. I said, can you do what I asked on the first one under 431,000? So why go another step? And we know it. I mean, just that's why I'm keeping it simple, like not look at all the other conservation infrastructure requirements, because that maybe would exceed 431,000. We already have that. All we're saying is we want the consultants to come up with something right now, because believe me, we're taking huge heat for these water restrictions that are in place right now. I tell you, I can't walk down the street without people actually being very upset and disappointed with what we've done by doing nothing. So these gentlemen here, as Councillor Martin says, give us a solution. I'm hoping that they come up with some alternate solutions, and if it means Moriarty and Healy, and then that's fine as well. But that's all I want to do at this committee of the whole meeting today. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion on the floor? Those opposed? Okay, that's great. Okay, we're done. Okay, I'd like to ask, thank you very much, gentlemen, for everything that you've done here today. And you'll be hearing from us sometime in the future, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
I would like to make a subsequent motion now.
No, I'm calling for adjournment. Like the motion to adjourn?
There needs to be a recommendation to the council. I would like to make a motion that council look at perhaps Shelton and Healy Lake as a upland storage option, and further that council direct staff to look at raising the capacity of the Aerosmith Dam, and further looking at the conservation guidelines for the community, including residential, commercial, and the resort areas. Something along those lines. Thank you.
No. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Fries, go ahead.
Okay, so council, we have these strong notes prepared here. I was really hoping to hear things come out of it because I liked what I was reading out of here too. So this motion kind of dips into that as well. Maybe Sean can speak to this. I was hoping he'd have a chance to raise a motion first.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. I did send staff motions for these. The first one is motion 1, water conservation plan, that the committee of the whole recommend that council direct staff to include in the scope of phase 2 water use planning and management study, the preparation of a comprehensive water conservation plan consistent with recommendation 3 of phase 1 of the final report. procured separately from a qualified water conservation specialist with a scope including risk benefit cost analysis of advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters, including leak detection and payback, a review of the city's water rate structure, including tiered pricing options that keep water for health, hygiene, and fire suppression affordable while pricing discretionary use to reflect its cost. An American Waterworks Association M36 water audit and water loss management plan, rainwater retention and aquifer recharge measures on
John,
city
let-
properties.
How about just do your last two? Let's not do all the background information.
Yeah, so the motions are
Point of order.
a little
The
bit more.
problem is that we actually have a motion on the floor unless Councillor Gore would like to withdraw that and we can have one other.
I'm
or
happy to
something.
have those motions. That looks like those are exactly the line of thought that I have. So I'm happy to include those three.
Mayor, the short ones are definitely in what's in front of you, but I just wanted to make sure that the motions capture the detail of what we need.
Are you talking about the ask is that phase 2 be?
Yeah.
Scoped as two jobs? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
That one?
yes.
Is that what you're talking about, Councilor Gore?
In addition, there will be the increasing the storage capacity at Aerosmith Dam. would be
Yes,
the
so
second.
that has been added since these notes because we did discuss it today.
It's a third. Anyways, yeah. So
I don't know.
the motion on the floor, unless Councilor Wood wants to make it, is the conservation plan be provided. Second, design and costing of the upland storage at Shelton and Healy Lakes. And third would be increasing the capacity of Aerosmith Dam, would be including the scope of phase 2.
I'm not sure how we can add more details to that later if that
Yeah.
works.
That's enough.
Would you agree to adding checking of the side stream storage that I messaged? And adding 3 to get my support.
If the budget allows, if within the budget, and the timelines, if we can meet, if the information is already available, you've mentioned, you've looked at this. It does not, like I said, take too much of our budget that we have and the timeline, I'll include that as number 4.
Well, then I suggest if we add the side stream storage as well into number 3 and then, but make it to achieve a budget for the following 3.
I do have a procedural question for staff, like since we just voted down the exact motion, like is it appropriate to include this in this motion now? And
If I may, we're in committee, so this has to be endorsed by council anyway. And I think it's fair because it's kind of a scope thing. So if it's all 4 of those things, again, our plan is to work with KWL to confirm that whatever priorities you vote on as a council, that's within the budget. And
Yes.
if not,
So-
we'll come back and tell you what additional budget might be needed.
Thank you. To clarify, that would be the last of the priorities in case we are not in the budget. That should be excluded if we are not able to get in the budget with side stream storage.
It would be based on all 4 of those things, if that's okay, because that's just,
If all
Easier.
4 of those things. Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Thank you. Everybody know the motion that's on the floor? Yes, you do, or you want to?
Just a question through yourself to staff, if I may,
We're
Mayor.
amending your motion.
Are these new RFPs or they're going to be within the current contract with KWL?
if I may, I think we can sort that out before the council meeting.
Okay.
It depends on what council's intent is. We have current budget and a current amount allocated for phase 2. We would have to work with KWL to make sure that whatever you're asking is within their expertise and within a reasonable time frame, and that it's work they can do. So it's not really a definitive decision. Council is basically voting on the priorities and they're going to get them costed and come back to you.
Does that work? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. And those opposed? Councillor Grenz is opposed. Thank you. Carries. Maybe you can go now. I don't know. I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Franz, seconded by Councillor Wood. All those in favor? Thank you. Committee of the whole is now adjourned. Thank you.